The last 75 years have seen more technological advancement than all of human history that preceded it. After industrial revolutions, political revolutions, computing revolutions, and now ongoing revolutions in artificial intelligence, humanity is poised for an era of unprecedented growth and transformation. The experts are united. Humankind's future is set to be shaped in and through digital technology, and specifically through artificial intelligence. In a world demanding perpetual growth in skills, knowledge, and market share, how can we make sense of AI and navigate it intelligently and thoughtfully? In his classic work, Utopia, Thomas More writes of a fictional and idealized island community that he presents as the good place, which is what our modern definition of the word utopia generally is. In it, More implicitly critiques various aspects of the 16th century society in which he lived. And in doing so, he also sets out various things about what he saw as the ingredients of a utopian society. One in which people have dignity, freedom, happiness, peace, wealth, education, etc. In the 500 years since, the human search for utopia has never really stopped. There have been plenty of different ideas of how to get there, and we've even fought some horrific wars over those ideas. But pretty much everyone, everywhere, all of the time, continues to instinctively work towards making things better. We're all looking for the good place, and we're all trying to build it. But how? At least one ingredient that we're all agreed on in our pursuit of utopia is the idea of automation. Cars, bikes, planes, and trains save us having to walk everywhere. Ovens and microwaves save us having to light a fire every time we want to cook or warm something. And of course, our phones save us having to travel or send letters in order to communicate with other people. As philosopher and mathematician Alfred Whitehead said, civilization advances by extending the number of important operations we can perform without thinking about them. In a way, the history of technology and its advancement is just a history of automation. Into that history has come and will continue to come a new wave of technological automation, which we often hear broadly referred to as artificial intelligence. It's already baked into our smart appliances, smartphones, and smart homes. But in more obvious ways, generative artificial intelligence, like ChatGPT, is becoming increasingly mainstreamed, and as a result is becoming a bigger part of our everyday lives, questions, conversations, and importantly, our concerns and uncertainties. The story was told of the great Nobel Prize winning physicist Albert Einstein, who was once on a long-distance regional train, but had lost his ticket. Of course, the train conductor knew who he was, given his international celebrity status, and told him not to worry about his ticket. But soon after that conversation, the conductor saw Einstein on his knees, still looking under his seat for his train ticket. He said, "Professor Einstein, it's okay. You don't need to worry about your ticket. We know who you are." Einstein looked up at him and said, "Son, you might know who I am, but I don't know where I'm going." AI represents probably the greatest technological revolution since the steam engine in the late 1600s and the invention of electricity in the late 1700s. But it leaves us with a reversal of Einstein's problem. He knew who he was but didn't know where he was going. We seem to know where we're going, but we're increasingly struggling to work out who we are. The current public discourse around artificial intelligence has faint echoes, at least to some degree, with an ancient story from the Bible's Old Testament. It's the story of the Tower of Babel. As it's told, it occurred at a time of great technological advancement. There had clearly been great leaps in architecture, engineering, and metallurgy that fueled this great project to build a tower to the heavens. The purpose of building it was to make a name for themselves. It was an ancient striving for significance, meaning, and achievement through technology. But it didn't end well. God stepped in and thwarted this grand human project by scrambling the ability of those involved to communicate with each other. There are plenty of modern resonances with this old story. However, it's pretty clear from even a cursory glance at the story of the Tower of Babel and a glance at our modern headlines and the public discussion around artificial intelligence that the same old issues continue to be in play. As we search for utopia, we face questions of what it means to be human, of how we discern right from wrong, of how we measure and obtain human flourishing, and of how we think through and talk through these issues with one another, knowing that there are going to be disagreements. In order to do this, I want to suggest that when it comes to AI, we need to do at least three things: understand it technologically, prepare for it thoughtfully, and think about it existentially. Firstly, we need to understand it technologically. Put simply, we need to understand what it is. Artificial intelligence, or machine learning as it's sometimes referred to, is at its base about pumping data through algorithms to optimize for specific outcomes. And an algorithm is simply a set of codes, rules, or principles that are designed to achieve a particular task. For example, someone working on AI technology in relation to self-driving cars might prepare a digital description in computing code to help an onboard camera identify what a stop sign is. He or she might then show the machine millions of things that are stop signs and millions of things that are not stop signs. Through this, the machine learns how to correctly identify a stop sign. Obviously, a pretty important capability if self-driving vehicles are going to be mainstreamed. Much of this new AI revolution revolves around an idea that is referred to as the neural networks approach, which is about trying to mimic the underlying architecture of the human brain by constructing layers of artificial neurons that can receive and transmit information and then pump it with data to enable what's called deep learning. It uses huge amounts of data, which results in algorithms being able to recognize patterns and optimize for a specific outcome. For example, whether a driverless car slows down to a red light or whether a bank approves a life insurance plan or a loan. Now, with all of this comes the possibility of great benefits, some of which we're already beginning to see. Productivity, quality of life improvements, better healthcare, transport, efficient cities. In fact, a recent PricewaterhouseCoopers report estimated that artificial intelligence and related technologies would add around $15 trillion to global GDP by 2030. One very obvious example of AI in real life, as I've briefly mentioned, is generative artificial intelligence, most commonly experienced through online engines like ChatGPT. It's worth taking a moment to think about what generative AI is. The printing press, when we invented it, revolutionized information reproduction. But that was information that had already been produced by people. By contrast, generative AI, like ChatGPT, marks a change in the nature and cost structure of information production. It's significant because it's not just about scaling and rearranging things that we have already done. It's about generating and creating new things with fewer and fewer people involved at fewer and fewer stages of the creativity and production process. Yes, there is a degree to which it requires pre-provided data to work with, but the generation process is qualitatively different to anything we've seen before. There's plenty more that could be said about the various aspects of AI. Books and theories are literally being written as I speak, at an alarming rate about how we can better understand AI technologically. My intention is to give you a very brief overview of a couple of aspects of what AI is and how it is being used and mainstreamed in everyday life. Let's move on to how we might prepare for the continuing explosion of AI thoughtfully. First, it's worth noting that artificial intelligence has limitations. There are, of course, debates around these limitations and whether or not they can be overcome. But in my view, there are at least two significant limitations that will not change, regardless of how advanced our AI technologies become. The first is that AI is not sentient. It doesn't feel or experience life subjectively in the way that human beings do. By its very nature, AI is about objective processing, the understanding of and recognition of data and reality in predictable, calculable, repeatable ways, so as to optimize for particular outcomes. But that's not how human beings operate all of the time. Two maths professors may well come to the same conclusion given a certain maths problem, but those same two professors may not necessarily come to the same conclusion when offered 5 different flavors of ice cream and asked to choose their favorite. Over time, AI may well be able to understand the preferences of ice cream of a particular person and suggest other flavors that they might like, where to buy them at the best prices, and even put in automatic orders for that ice cream to be delivered at the right times of day under the right temperatures for it to be optimally enjoyed. However, AI, at least in its current nature and trajectory, cannot subjectively experience the flavor of chocolate ice cream in the way that you or I do. It's just not sentient in the way that people are. And all of the arguments that I've seen that make the case for its sentience, or perhaps its future sentience, necessarily have to redefine the word sentient. The nature of AI is such that it's about understanding in a cognitive sense, not feeling in a human sense. Another limitation that's pretty much impossible to deny is that AI is not intrinsically ethical. It's neither moral nor immoral. It's amoral, meaning that any ethical or moral layer that we want to introduce into the AI systems, devices, and technologies that we plan to utilize in our lives and in our societies, we have to program that in. Sure, we can even train our AI systems for particular moral outcomes and ethical objectives, but that training has to come from us. A great example of this limitation expressed itself when artificial intelligence was tested as a replacement for a judge in a US court. It was presented with data that tracked all the way back to the early 1900s of multiple judicial decisions and the reasoning behind them, and it was coded with all of the relevant statutes and regulations too. The idea was that it would be able to apply all of those judicial and legislative principles, precedents, and rules to any given situation put before it. And it did. The problem, of course, was that many of the decisions that it was fed were intrinsically racist, having been handed down long before the United States civil rights advancements of the 1960s. The AI judge got it right in following the letter of the law and the principles of precedent. What it didn't know was that much of its data set came from a time when that particular society had aspects of its morality wrong. In a world where we are constantly and continuously debating what's right and wrong, with the public consensus on everything from slavery to rape in marriage to mixed-race families changing over time, a set-and-forget AI approach to anything that involves moral thinking on any level is manifestly inadequate. We can outsource a lot to artificial intelligence, but we can't outsource our moral reasoning. In the words of AI thought leader and investor Kai-Fu Lee, AI is essentially about spotting correlations in data and making predictions. We are some way from what is referred to as artificial superintelligence or general intelligence, when AI can effectively do everything that a person can cognitively do. And even when it can, it won't be humanly sentient, and it won't be generatively and independently ethical. As Professor Joseph Millichamp said, the artificial in AI is real. Deep learning is simply an improvement on human decision-making, not an automatic fix for all human problems. I've spoken about the need to understand AI technologically and to prepare for it thoughtfully. Thirdly and finally then, we also need to think about it existentially. Our understanding of, use of, and development of artificial intelligence will continue. But we need to keep having the discussion about what it means to be human, what is right and wrong, and how we discern one from the other. A way of thinking through these questions may be to consider the two broad approaches that have been suggested in how we understand and utilize AI. The first is the techno-utopian approach, referred to by thinkers like Yuval Noah Harari, Nick Bostrom, and others. This view, to some degree, recommends ignoring the ethical limits and human implications of the advancement of artificial intelligence and related technologies. Admittedly, these thinkers don't completely ignore the possible pitfalls, but they are confident that we can put the right protections in place to avoid AI turning rogue. Beyond that, they give scant consideration to the ethical minefield that we face. Rather, they are confident that if we put our heads down and just go for it, our AI will get better, our lives will get easier, and maybe we can finally get to utopia. The second approach is what I'll refer to as the holistic approach, put forward by thinkers like Kai-Fu Lee and Professor John Lennox. This approach recognises the need to give deep and continuing consideration to the ideals of things like love, service, compassion, and underlying all of that, the question of what it means to be human. In writing on the intersection between moral reasoning and technoculture, philosopher and theologian Brent Waters correctly declares the need for an underlying moral philosophy to inform our engagement with technology. This calls for an acknowledgement of something outside of ourselves and a necessary commitment to the transcendent. He warns against techno-utopianism as a metaphysical vacuum. In Waters' words, since there is no eternal good, there is correspondingly nothing inherent in nature or human nature to be acknowledged. Rather, nature and human nature are just materials to be manipulated in asserting the will to mastery and self-mastery, and there are no moral constraints. Waters' warnings may sound alarmist to some, but they are relevant, timely, and point to the risks and shortcomings of proceeding down the techno-utopian path without any consideration of existential truths. Responding to the concerns of Waters and others requires at least two things that humankind has always needed and that we need to be aware of now more than ever with the onset of AI technology. We need a basis for ethics outside of our datasets, and we need a deeper, unchanging conception of what it means to be human that goes beyond being happiness-maximising pleasure machines. The Christian message has plenty to offer in relation to these questions, and it seems to meet them head-on. Among other things, it envisions people as image bearers of a transcendent creator, endowed with intrinsic value and dignity. Made not just for happiness optimization or suffering minimization, but for a loving relationship and connection, both with God and with one another. The Christian message offers both a moral and a metaphysical layer to everyday life, one that goes far beyond mere cognition, utility maximization, wealth creation, and productivity. People are not, according to the Bible's vision, raw material and processes that can be replicated by machines, but divinely valued creatures. We are ends, not just means. Interestingly, the word utopia today takes its modern spelling from Thomas More's book Utopia. However, More both wrote that book and titled it with layers of irony and satire in mind. The word utopia, meaning good place, was historically spelled with an E, not a U. Dropping the E and spelling utopia with a U, finally and ironically enough, means no place at all. According to the Christian vision of human flourishing, when we try to build utopia in our strength, with our own tech, without God in the picture, we are no place at all. There is another helpful reminder in the book of Genesis in the Bible that closely follows the story of the Tower of Babel, one of humankind's many failed attempts at shaking off transcendent realities to build our own utopia. In the very next chapter, God calls on Abraham to be a blessing to others. The Tower of Babel, the human instinct to make a name for ourselves, the call of Abraham and of all people to be a blessing to others. This old message offers important and enduring lessons and a relevant framework through which we can make use of AI thoughtfully and responsibly without losing focus of who we are or why we're here.